Operation Barbarossa. The largest surprise attack in modern military history, and the invasion that would change the course of World War II. In the early hours of the 22nd of June, 1941, Hitler launched more than 3 million German soldiers against the Soviet Union, breaking the Molotov-Ribbentrop non-aggression pact signed just 2 years earlier. This wasn't just another offensive, it was an operation of total annihilation. The objective: completely destroy Soviet capacity to resist in just 8 to 10 weeks before the Russian winter. The invasion mobilized 153 German divisions, including 19 panzer divisions with 3,350 tanks, 2,770 aircraft, 7,200 artillery pieces, and 600,000 motorized vehicles. An unprecedented combat force across a 2,900-kilometer front, divided into 3 army groups: center toward Leningrad, center toward Moscow, and south toward Kiev. The first months were devastating for the Soviets. The Luftwaffe destroyed 1,200 Soviet aircraft in the first 24 hours, many still on the ground. German blitzkrieg tactics produced advances of up to 80 kilometers per day. In just 6 weeks, more than 3 million Soviet soldiers were captured or killed. Numbers that simply defy human comprehension. The German advance conquered Ukraine, Belarus, and the Baltic states, surrounded Leningrad, and came within just 25 kilometers of Moscow. The operation was named after the medieval Germanic emperor Frederick Barbarossa, reflecting Hitler's imperial ambitions. What few German commanders foresaw was the Soviet resistance, which gradually intensified. The weather, initially ignored in German planning, became a decisive factor. When the first snows fell in October, followed by the Rasputitsa, the mud season, the German offensive began losing momentum. Tanks and vehicles became stuck in roads that transformed into swamps. In December, with temperatures of 30 C, German weapons froze and soldiers died of hypothermia. Operation Barbarossa, although causing catastrophic losses to the Soviet Union, failed in its primary objective. Hitler underestimated the strategic depth of Soviet territory, Stalin's determination, and Soviet industrial capacity. This strategic failure, perhaps the Third Reich's greatest, opened the true hell of the Eastern Front WWII, a war of attrition that Germany could not win and that would ultimately seal its fate. The Battle of Moscow was the Wehrmacht's first major strategic setback in World War II. Following the initial success of Operation Barbarossa, Hitler directed his forces toward the Soviet capital in October 1941 with Operation Typhoon. The German advance faced defenses prepared by General Zhukov, who mobilized over 600,000 civilians to construct 3 defensive rings with 1,400 kilometers of trenches. Temperatures plummeted to 30 C, freezing German equipment unprepared for the Russian winter, while specialized Soviet winter combat troops, equipped with appropriate uniforms, launched their counteroffensive. The German army reached within 25 kilometers of Moscow before being repelled in a counteroffensive that pushed them back 250 kilometers from the capital. The successful defense preserved the Soviet nerve center of command and control, vital industrial facilities, and the important logistical hub. More than 1.9 million German soldiers participated in the operation, with total losses of 400,000 men. The Red Army mobilized 1.2 million soldiers, losing approximately 650,000. A little-known curiosity is that the victorious Red Army parade on the 7th of November 1941 occurred under bombardment, with troops marching directly from Red Square to the front line. The Battle of Moscow demonstrated that blitzkrieg had clear limitations, and that the Soviet Union, contrary to Hitler's expectations, was not a colossus with feet of clay. This battle changed the course of the war, transforming Germany's lightning offensive into a war of attrition that Germany could not win. The Siege of Leningrad. 872 days of hunger, cold, and death. The longest and deadliest military operation in modern European history. In September 1941, as part of Operation Barbarossa, German and Finnish forces completely encircled Leningrad, isolating its 3 million inhabitants. Hitler's plan was simple and brutal. No frontal assaults. The city would be left to starve to death. Food rationing was implemented immediately. At the height of winter in 1941, the population received only 125 grams of bread per day, composed mainly of cellulose and bran. Temperatures plunged to 30 degrees below zero. Water, electricity, and heating systems completely collapsed. By January 1942, approximately 20,000 civilians were dying daily. Survivors ate anything: wallpaper paste, leather belts, and there are confirmed reports of cannibalism. The only supply line was the so-called Road of Life, an improvised route over the frozen Lake Ladoga, where truck convoys crossed under constant German aerial bombardment. During the operation, about 1,000 vehicles were lost in the frozen waters. Despite everything, Leningrad's war industry never completely stopped. Tanks were produced and sent directly to the front lines. In January 1944, the Red Army finally broke the siege, driving out the Axis forces. The final toll: more than 1 million civilians dead and hundreds of thousands of soldiers fallen on both sides. Nowhere else in World War II did civilian resistance demonstrate such determination not to surrender. Leningrad didn't just survive, it broke the will of an invading empire. The Battle of Stalingrad. The confrontation that redefined the course of World War II. When the German Wehrmacht advanced on this industrial city on the banks of the Volga in August 1942, no one could have predicted we would witness the most brutal and decisive urban combat in modern history. The strategic objective was clear: control the main Soviet supply corridor and capture the Caucasus oil refineries. The city bore Stalin's name, making it a target of both practical and symbolic value. The German Sixth Army, commanded by General Friedrich Paulus, initially made significant advances using blitzkrieg tactics and Luftwaffe air support, which conducted more than 2,000 sorties in a single day, reducing much of the city to rubble. However, the Soviet defenders, led by General Vasily Chuikov, implemented a strategy called hugging the enemy, keeping their positions so close to the German ones that they neutralized the superiority of German artillery and air power. The fighting fragmented into thousands of small battles for factories, houses, and even individual rooms. A single building, Pavlov's house, was defended by just 25 men for 58 days against relentless attacks. On the 19th of November 1942, the Soviet counteroffensive, Operation Uranus, surrounded the Sixth Army with 1 million troops, 13,541 artillery pieces, and 894 tanks, creating an impenetrable encirclement. Temperatures dropped to 30 C, freezing German equipment unprepared for the Russian winter. When Paulus finally surrendered on the 2nd of February 1943, the Germans had lost 800,000 men dead, wounded, or captured. The Soviets lost more than 1.1 million. Of the 10,000 tons of ammunition promised by Gring, only 120 arrived by air. The city was completely destroyed, with 99% of its buildings reduced to rubble. This was Germany's first major defeat in the war, the turning point on the Eastern Front that began the retreat of Axis forces. In modern warfare, we rarely see such brutal determination on both sides, and such a devastating human cost to capture what eventually became nothing more than a landscape of ruins and ashes. The Battle of Kursk. The largest tank confrontation in history. A titanic clash between 6,000 tanks, 4,000 aircraft, and 2 million men in an area of just 150 kilometers. In July 1943, after the devastating defeat at Stalingrad, Hitler authorized Operation Citadel, an ambitious plan to eliminate the large Soviet salient near the city of Kursk. The German strategy was simple yet audacious. Simultaneously attack from the northern and southern flanks to encircle and destroy more than 5 Soviet armies. The Wehrmacht concentrated its elite formations, including panzer divisions equipped with the new Panther tanks and the feared Tigers, with 100 mm frontal armor capable of withstanding virtually any Soviet projectile. On the Soviet side, Marshal Zhukov did not wait passively. Communication interceptions and field intelligence revealed German plans weeks in advance. The Soviets built 8 successive defensive lines with 5,000 kilometers of trenches, 4,000 minefields, and 700,000 anti-tank mines. For each kilometer of front, the Russians installed an incredible 1,700 mines. The clash began on July 5 with a massive German bombardment, but the Soviets had already evacuated their forward positions. The Germans advanced slowly through the mined terrain, while Sturmovik Il-2 fighters attacked their columns. The culminating point occurred on July 12 near the small village of Prokhorovka, where 850 tanks collided in an area of just 4 square kilometers. Soviet T-34 tanks intentionally shortened the distance to negate the range advantage of German guns, while the Tigers tried to maintain distance to exploit their greater accuracy. The German advance was finally halted at a brutal cost. The Soviets lost more than 177,000 men and 1,600 tanks, while the Germans suffered 57,000 casualties and lost more than 300 tanks, including many irreparable Tigers and Panthers. The battle marked the point of no return on the Eastern Front. After Kursk, the Wehrmacht would never regain strategic initiative, and the Soviet Union would begin a relentless offensive that would only end in Berlin. As General Heinz Guderian observed, German armored forces, after the failure at Kursk, would never again regain their former quality. The decisive battle that definitively transformed World War II. Operation Bagration, the codename for the Soviet summer offensive of 1944, was the most successful annihilation campaign since the German Blitzkrieg. Named after General Pyotr Bagration, a Russian hero killed fighting Napoleon in 1812, this operation represented the total collapse of the German Army Group Center in Belarus. The Soviet High Command employed a maskirovka plan, military deception, on an unprecedented scale. While the Germans expected the main attack in the south, in Ukraine, the Soviets secretly concentrated 118 infantry divisions, 2,715 tanks, and 1,355 aircraft against the weakened central sector. On the 22nd of June, 1944, exactly 3 years after the Nazi invasion of the USSR, the Soviets launched a devastating assault on 4 simultaneous fronts. The initial artillery bombardment used more than 24,000 guns and mortars. The Germans simply couldn't respond to the speed and scale of the attack. The German Ninth Army was encircled within the first 5 days. The city of Minsk was liberated on July 3, capturing another 100,000 German soldiers. The offensive advanced 450 kilometers in depth, liberated all of Belarus and much of Lithuania, bringing the Red Army to the gates of Warsaw. Of the initial 38 German divisions, 28 were completely destroyed. The final statistics are impressive: 350,000 German casualties, including 150,000 dead and another 105,000 captured. When the dust settled, the Wehrmacht had lost more men in Operation Bagration than at Stalingrad. The fact that this operation was launched just 2 weeks after D-Day was no coincidence. Stalin was fulfilling his promise to the Allies of a major summer offensive. This strategic synchronization forced Hitler to fight on 2 massive fronts simultaneously, without adequate reserves for either. After Bagration, German defeat was no longer a question of if, but only when. The battles for the Baltic states represent a decisive chapter in the Soviet offensive following the success of Operation Bagration. Between July and October 1944, the Red Army launched a series of coordinated attacks across the three Baltic fronts to recapture Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania from Nazi control. The Narva-Tartu offensive paved the way through Estonia, while the German Army Group North was progressively pushed into what became known as the Courland Pocket. This encirclement isolated 33 German divisions with approximately 200,000 men who were effectively removed from the main theater of operations. Soviet forces, mobilizing more than 900,000 soldiers, 3,000 tanks, and 2,600 aircraft, managed to liberate Riga on October 15, solidifying Soviet control of the region. The Germans suffered around 160,000 casualties in this campaign, which not only disrupted the supply line of Army Group North, but also exposed the eastern flank of Prussia to future Soviet offensives. Interestingly, some isolated German units on the Courland Peninsula continued to resist until the final day of the war in Europe, surrendering only after Germany's official capitulation. The Battle of Berlin. The military operation that sealed the fate of the Third Reich and ended the European theater of World War II. On the 16th of April 1945, more than 2.5 million Soviet soldiers, commanded by Marshals Zhukov and Konev, converged on Berlin across three distinct fronts, facing approximately 766,000 desperate and poorly equipped German defenders. The city was encircled within 72 hours. During my mission to Berlin in 1987, it was still possible to identify scars from this confrontation on surviving structures. The Soviet advance was relentless. Over 42,000 artillery pieces fired upon German defenses, while 7,500 aircraft dominated the skies. Soviet firepower was so intense that entire sectors of the city were reduced to rubble within hours. Our tactical analyses identify three distinct phases: the outer encirclement, the breach of urban defenses, and the final assault on the government center. Hitler, entrenched in his bunker, committed suicide on April 30, while his generals attempted to negotiate partial surrenders. The urban combat was brutal, each building a fortress, each corner an ambush. The Soviet casualty rate was staggering: approximately 80,000 dead and 280,000 wounded in just 2 weeks of fighting. The psychological weight of this battle was evident in veterans' accounts. Many mentioned the oppressive silence that followed after the surrender on May 2, when a city of 4 million inhabitants had been reduced to a field of smoldering ruins. The Battle of Berlin represents not just a military victory, but the definitive end of the bloodiest war in European history. In the next episode, Pearl Harbor. The attack that awakened the sleeping giant and altered the course of World War II. On the morning of the 7th of December 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy executed a surprise operation against the American naval base in Hawaii in a display of tactical precision.